Hi, folks. I'm Wayne Ebersole, your host today of the ReGen Life podcast, and also co-founder of Big Sky Capital Group. Welcome to another episode of this podcast. I want to introduce you to a friend of mine that I've known now close to, I think it was 9 years. He goes by the tagline of Farming Weird. He's active in ag Twitter space and has done a lot of unconventional things and research in farming and improving the profitability of farms. His name is Jason Mauck. Jason, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Wayne.
It's good to have you here. It's been a while since I chatted with you, so it's cool. I remember visiting you. I think you're in Indiana, if I remember correctly. And I remember visiting you, probably it was in 2016, I believe it was. And I rode a sprayer with you and was looking at all you were doing there when you were starting the whole intercropping thing. And you used the terminology of farming weird. So tell us how you got started farming. What was your process? What's your background? What's the process that led you to this?
Well, it started, they just locked me in my sandbox when I was little, and I would just steal stuff out of the grain bin and use the cat manure and all that stuff. And Mom said I'd never even want to go into the house. I'd always just do it out there. But it was always around farming, would ride with Dad, hitting my head on the back of the tractor plowing growing up. And I just always go with him. And so, I got into high school and there just wasn't a lot of money or a place on the farm because both sides of my family farm and there's a lot of grandkids. So I went off and got a college education marketing, moved to the city, started selling insurance. And I didn't really like the salesmanship process. I just liked meeting the people. And, so basically, I got out of school and there still wasn't room. And I would come help on the farm and load pigs, but I just wanted to get my hands dirty. So I started a landscape business in town and really pushed that hard for about 7 years. And then my dad got pancreatic cancer. He came down with, he wasn't feeling very well. And that just completely flipped my life. I always wanted to go to the farm to farm with my dad. And then he passed just a few months later. So I was basically given the reins on putting the crop out at 30. So this will be my 14th or 15th crop since that day. And pain teaches, and even no matter what my journey, whether it was landscaping or sales or something, you always felt pain and you had to figure it out. And farming, this whole intercropping or what, the reason a lot of people want to talk to me about was just an evolution of pain and trying to solve riddles, I call them. I call riddles pain points. And how do we not do this again? Is the way my mind always works.
Interesting. So you started farming. Well, I assume your dad was farming conventionally, like monocropping, heavy tillage, chemical usage.
Yeah, there really wasn't, we put a little weed out to put manure on or cover crop or ditch or tile something. But otherwise, a lot of corn production. We have a lot of hogs on our farm that we've really built up. Even since Dad has passed, we've built 2 big quads. So, I wouldn't call our farm just, the feather in the cap of regenerative farming. There's a lot more people further along in the process than myself. This was the last 10 years has really been a struggle of proving to myself and proving to everyone in my family that we could go a different direction. And just this spring, my grandpa passed. So there was 14 years with me and my grandpa, 47 years apart, just kind of butting heads of the direction that we would go. And so I had to learn how to farm kind of both ways to the best that I possibly can. And I'm probably more of a hybrid than, a lot of people that you'll find in the regenerative space. A lot of scale, no matter what we're doing, a lot of pigs, a lot of acres, large equipment, and trying to make all this stuff work with that equipment.
What was your first pain point that made you say, there's got to be a better way to do this, or there's got to be more profit in this?
Well, it's, yeah, from a profit I think you arrive there just not shitting your pants. That's a bad way of putting it. But when you get in these positions where you walk back and do the steps backward, and you're like, how did we get here? And the big pain point for us, it was pushed that since we have all this manure, we're just going to keep growing corn. And we had a lot of really wet springs to where our dragline applicator would get stuck. It would just get hung up, and we'd be pumping manure out to the applicator, and they couldn't shut it off. And it was just these really terrible situations where we had just constant ponding in our fields for years. We couldn't get them to drain. So a lot of it's helped by we got out of that wet pattern, but to mitigate that, I started using the wheat just to infiltrate the water, consume water. And I look at everything. I'm kind of a weather and math dork. And there's part a biology standpoint to this and part physics. And the thing that I just never understood, going from managing hundreds of acres of landscape to bare and just everything dead but one crop farming, was the water flows and why aren't we capturing, especially the water and how we manage it. So that's how it started initially. It was a water play and it was a weed play, water hemp, just with those thin stands. If you don't have a vigorous crop growing, then the weeds are going to take over. And, if you're the one spraying it and you're feeling how many jugs you're putting in or what you're recommending and how many times you're impacting, a lot of farmers were feeling that in that 13, 14, 15 range before the dicamba beans came out. And then dicamba created its own whole new storm behind that. So,
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
I think when I first met you in 16, you were just starting to use cover crops, if I remember correctly. Tell me about what prompted that. Was it, again, the hard pan issues that you were having, or was there other reasons that you started using cover crops?
Mostly weeds, where we have manure. So when I came to the farm, we had the pigs, but we would still put in hydrous and we still put full rate P&K on this ground. So our ground was so hot that I kind of had to understand what we were working with, get the line down, get it balanced. But our weed flushes, both water hemp and the henbits and the chickweeds of the world, were so prolific in those wet springs. We had such a mat of henbit and chickweed that we, in our current system with a soil finisher, we just had a mess. So I started using cover crops with the wheat initially as being offensive to grow what I wanted instead of dealing with consequences of trying to fight off everything and then growing weeds. So that's what it began with. And then, we've tried about every cover crop blend you can imagine, whether we're trying to have a winter kill, crimp it, graze it, or whatever, just have a better understanding of it. But I just, one of my first principles in my mind is I always want something green out in the field growing any day of the year in Indiana.
Now, you're in a fortunate position where you have access to manure. A lot of guys in Indiana, Illinois, and the Midwest there don't have access to manure, don't have access to cattle and stuff. How has that helped you in that regenerative process? Are you using more and more of that as your fertilizer? How does that look?
Well, it's less and less is
Really?
the goal. So, part of that initial understanding of what I had to work with, there was, I got my CCA, I got all the soil tests. There was kind of like a 3 or 4 year, like, we got to figure this shit out or I'm going to wreck the boat when I kind of took over the reins or whatever. And what I came to understand is I had enough P&K in our soils, if I could get the biology going, that we could use that as this huge equity kingpin and only start indexing nitrogen. So that would allow me to move the manure, put lower rates on additional owned ground away from the umbilical cord drag line. But you end up drag lining a lot more acres at low rates. But our goal is never to say, okay, how are we going to get rid of this manure? It's more like, where are we? How can we move on? And honestly, I don't know how much longer the system can go without us physically moving the manure away. There's good and bads to the system.
So you're in the other position of having too much. Your soil is so jacked up.
Too much for the economic, viable, easy way to move it.
Yeah.
You take a 1.5-mile drag line, which requires a booster pump. Once you get, beyond 2 or 3, I'm going through somebody else's ground,
Yeah.
going across roads, don't have right of ways, and it's too expensive. So, that whole riddle still, there's a lot of chapters to be written, whether we're going to separate it here at the barn and then move the 2 different flows or what have you.
Gotcha.
But we've used the cover crop, the relay cropping specifically in all our soil types, both non-manure and manure.
Oh, interesting. I want to get into
About
that,
a third of what we farm gets manure.
Okay.
So
I'm going to talk about that whole relay cropping thing, but before we get into that, you have a digester there, right? Or you were talking about putting a digester in or not?
We don't. No.
Yeah.
So Constant Canopy was created at the beginning of this, and we've had several projects over the years. The first one was a project to take local manure and turn it into renewable natural gas and biochar. And we got the building, we put the plan, kind of chased it for 2 years, and then eventually we're like, this thing is too big for us to want to chase, and we kind of left the space. But again, learned a lot. I used a lot of biochar in those couple of years to understand it. Yeah, but all these systems are $50 million, $100 million systems, and they kind of take some Gavin Newsom, California math, whatever the hell that stuff is, to work. And
yeah,
I don't want to be a part of on that bus. So
yeah, Indiana isn't California, right?
right. But somehow you just put it in the pipeline and it counts. So
interesting. So let's talk about a little bit about how you got to the relay cropping idea, because that's what you're really famous for. So what led you to that point of starting and experimenting with relay cropping?
Well, it started in 2013, and we get it, but I didn't get the beans in. I didn't have my plan. It was a wet spring, so kind of sat to the side for a couple of years. And then 2015, I finally had the time to go out and do it. And really, we didn't scale it much for the first 3 or 4 years until I better understood it. And we had some really, on the 3rd and 4th year, we really hit it well. We had a lot of precipitation in the spring and had our best soybean fields we've ever raised. We're raising intercrop soybeans, and they're better than raising soybeans without wheat. So that really opened my mind up to this alternative math, which I get a lot of criticism for, which is this whole marketing ploy of don't dilute yourself in any marketplace. And that is the definition of commodity, agriculture. But if you look at it through the lens of a marketing lens like I do, we can get 70-80% yield by just, throwing 30-40% of the inputs, banding things. And I came from a landscaping world where I design things with a 5, 10, 20-year grow out. So I have this different perception of how plants have plasticity. So, it started as this idea that we can raise like full wheat yields and full bean yields. And then it kind of got hit in the face the first few years to understand it better. And then it kind of zoned in to an efficiency mindset. And now I feel like I could just run with it, consulting and doing things on if it's really gave me a sense of freedom. Because it's a whole rabbit hole of, you can really you can go to the vault and just save your seed if you want to. If you got shit and seed and a plan, then you can feed and animals procreating. You really don't need anybody at the party except your own operation. And that's at the gist of it. That's the core of my motive is I have no want to be this Donny Osmond of industry to sell some widget or wadget. I did that. It's to figure out how to farm with no expense. And that gets me closer to it. So that was a long tangent, but that's kind of...
No, that's very interesting. So how many acres did you start with when you started playing with this?
So 20, and I was, 20 to 50 the first 3 years. And then we had a year where we put 250 out, and we've kind of stuck in that area as I could harvest it in 2 days. And then this year we put 400 out. But in that time, I'm so proud of it on social media. I mean, there's probably over 100 farmers that are doing nearly my same system, some to a T, and they're going around talking about it. So it's, and I, there was John Coots, Lauren Steinlager, some of these guys at the beginning here that were doing it as well. I've just kind of put my spin on it, and I, there's all kinds of tangents that we could go off on this idea of exponential mathematics in agriculture, of plant perceptions, of sequences, of life cycles, and understanding that, that S curve through each entity and their perception of one another. It's fascinating.
Yeah, interesting. So even if you get an 80% compared to average yield on soybeans and an 80% yield on wheat, you're still more than a monocrop, and you have less input. So your profitability factor multiplies significantly in a situation like that, correct?
Exactly. And it's a never ending battle to how efficient you can get it. If you only want the cream, the 80%, I can just stream bar, 800 gallons of hog manure and make a strip till machine on 5-foot centers really wide and give all the light to the beans. And then I can start, taxing equilibrium out the supply and demand of water in the spring, bringing light back. I can start indexing my inputs to where, we think we're so technological with this variable rate technology. We're still not farming vertically, and we're not banding things. If you go back to the 60s, we were just laying some prow, over what we planted, because that would just buy time and the cultivator couldn't scratch that spot. And we've kind of lost this thought of farming the whole season with these wide, long rotations, getting the livestock in, thinking vertically, time sequences, and all this stuff. And I mean, it's so much easier than it used to be. If you use the GMO soybeans and things like that, I mean, it's a layup. It's way easier. And that confidence came from being a landscaper, doing 200 or 300 acres of turf every year, and just understanding I have this proxy of weed out here. It's very easy to control weeds in the fall and the spring. I can use that proxy to get me basically through the whole season and not have to fight off these vicious, noxious weeds in the summer. So it's just came when you're posting all the time, you think of new ways to express why you like it. But there's just a lot of new things that have came from this mindset that I'm excited about. But I'm just going to be a complete weirdo until I kind of get it all out in the world, so you see what the hell I'm talking about.
Yeah. So what did you notice after doing this for several years? Did you notice any changes in your soil profile, your organic matter, your weed profile, anything like that?
Oh yeah, you just feel it. And that's what was handy about the battle with Grandpa, because as you kept the acres kind of minute, but I have some fields, I've done this for 10 years, and it's the difference. Here out in front of my house, I still haven't put a wheat crop on the rest of the field, but I've put this is the 5th wheat crop in the plot, and it is night and day difference. And now with the Google Earth, you can literally see it, how black that square is in comparison, especially through the inflection points of elevation. Your black spots to your really light tan spots where you got degraded soil. Throwing that thatch and that living root on there especially when you get into year 5, 6, 7, 8, you just feel it in the softness, the infiltration, and it's just reflected in the health of the crop that you're growing. And it's indicated in your weed pressures as well. I mean, if you can just completely, take the air off the fire with carbon, I just don't have to fight the flushes of the previous system. So that's what gets you pushing, is like, you've been staring at it. You're the one out walking at the field with your shovel, and the struggle is communicating the difference to the people not willing to come out with the shovel, and they don't know the struggle. And, the industry's just saying, well, why don't you just use this chemical? I mean, it kills my stuff. Well, I don't want to grow weeds.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't want to put myself in a position to have to fight fires with this big of a fire truck.
Yeah. How did you convince your grandpa to let you do more and more of this?
I just kept doing it and pissing him off. I mean, I bought, so he thought he had bibs. I love him to death, but he had these big bibs and he had the checkbook right here. And that's just kind of how he, it was just like everything had to run through him. So when I started speaking, if I got $2 or $3 grand from a gig, I just put it in the bank. And then I started buying I bought an old shitty combine and a Gandy box. And I just started buying all these easy bake oven farm kits. So I could farm 200 or 300 acres in this way that I wanted. And what I loved, it was old, shitty, sloppy stuff. And I'd still make way more money than, we would trade and get the most badass, Y drops and planter and all this stuff, which I'd use now, but it's like golf or sex. Like you can be sloppy and it's still enjoyable, but if you follow first principles, you can not be that great at it. And it's still better than being perfect at a old system that needs rebooted. And that's the way I look at monocropping now. And now there's still value to a good 20-inch corn crop. It's easy to grow, weed suppression. So I like that as part of our rotation. But beans by themselves it's a pain point. So we want to do this cereal on all the acres eventually.
So talking about your crop rotation a little bit. So you do a crop, let's say this year or last year, you did a crop of soybeans and wheat. Do you go to corn the following year? What does your crop rotation look like with that whole intercropping process?
Yeah, we're always following corn with 20-inch corn at higher densities. We'll do an early hybrid and we'll shell it a little like 22% in late September. And we have a chopping head so we can come in and manage all that residue of 250, 275 bushel corn. And I use that trash as actual weed suppression in my wheat. So we'll spray some Zidua down with a little 2,4-D when we get to 2-leaf, and that will pretty much hold until we plant the soybeans. And then at that point, we get the canopy about a month earlier in the spring. So we can zip that shut. We rip out the wheat with the combine and manage that traffic, and then we're back to corn. So we're getting 3 crops in 2 years instead of 2 crops in 2 years. With the idea is the wheat is all about contribution margin, where if we strive for 110, 130 bushel wheat, we're going to have, if you're doing multiple fungicide passes, multiple nitrogen passes, higher rates, higher seeding rates, it's fathomable that I can raise these wheat in strips with a planter for less than 50% of the cost, if not less, which wheat in general isn't the most expensive crop to think of, but everyone is like, well, wheat's $5. Why do you even mess with it? Well, if I can save on cost of goods sold of the wheat $100 and wheat's $5, that's 20 bushel. And that's essentially the compromise. So my compromise is made up and I'm whole immediately with the savings and the cost. So it's a completely different mindset of, okay, now it's a calendar day by day instance of where's the weeds, where's the beans, what is the inflection, what is the tax, or what is the, expression of soybeans. And that's just what we really look at is we don't want the bean yields to suffer. So what can we get away with? So that's the system in a nutshell. And then we get so much volunteer wheat. So when we're taking those wheat strips out, our combine is basically, you could call it harvest loss, but it's seeding my cover crop in July. And I'll have a mat of green that will come in. What I've done in the past is we're taking our VT tool and just trying to work the top couple inches. And I call it sprigging, as it will rip up the root and then it'll rain again. And then I don't spray any herbicide. So I plant green, but I kind of lower the density of the cover crop a little bit and level out the field. So my overall chemical for the whole rotation with the 3 crops is significantly less than if I monocrop twice, because I'm not leaving my field open to anything that nature wants to grow. I'm in control of the situation.
Yes.
And that's just kind of the way I look at that specific
And as all
cropping.
farmers know, soil wants to be covered. I mean, nature's going to
Yes.
cover your soil. And you can either fight that or you can work with that and control that process, which is what you're doing there. Have you ever considered any other intercropping other than soybeans and wheat?
Oh, all kinds of stuff.
Okay. Have you experimented with any of that? Any other?
Everything you can imagine. I mean, we've done the corn and the soybeans, but you end up dinging the soybeans somewhat. So we're doing intergrazing, where we're planting alleyways of corn. So if you think about how we've been growing our wheat, we grow 4 rows on and 4 rows off. So we're only actually farming 38% of the footprint. But because the plants have brains and our minds and they adapt, they grow out laterally. So we figured out, okay, how wide did we need to be to where they don't quite touch? So the wheat strives. So 52 inches out of the 60 is green. And that just enough light for the beans to grow for 80 or 90 days, and the wheat goes back up. So if we think the same thing with corn and alley crop corn, instead of 33-inch tall wheat, we've got 104-inch tall corn, the same angles and the same expression apply. And I've measured the leaves on corn, different hybrids, to see how much they eject out. And if there's a gap, they're actually full out striving the entire season. So we're going to do a lot of different experiments this year to figure out, okay, do we need to be 10-foot alleyways, 6-foot alleyways, 8-foot, something like that, to where we can push the density and get hybrids with big fat leaves on the edge and get 800 bushel row yield corn on the edge rows, taller hybrids in the middle, create this phi shape. And now we can come in with autonomous tractors and maybe scoop up turkey litter, and we're using it like an orchard in season. We can take our manure in our field and put 500 gallons an acre in August, when it's filling out its ears. I want to have access and a continuous controlled traffic pattern in this system. So I could go on for 15 days on this idea of this modulated controlled traffic farming system that, something like Zach's stock croppers, it could literally bring water and pig feed to them, move them 10 feet, go to another one. They could be little humanoid, but autonomous regenerative farming tractors. That's kind of my mindset as we go forward.
Interesting.
That's a long tangent, wasn't it?
No, that's good. I love it. I've looked at that stock cropper thing. That thing looks pretty interesting too. And I've been following those guys as well as the pasture bird guys and all those. So there's a lot of innovation happening in the regen space. Without divulging any financial information, just give us a rough idea of how much your bottom line has improved by moving to this system. Just rough.
Well, again, we've had looks at it long term, but comfortably we can shoot for 70-70, which is 70 bushel wheat, 70 bushel soybeans. And our APH is right around there. So even if we can come close, when you consider the cost of production of soybeans and the contribution margin over to wheat, we're usually going to be between $200 and $300 more profitable on the soybean side of the equation of the rotation. And we're finding our corn yields are ramping up quite a bit as we get into the system. Our plot right out front here, we first broke 300 bushel corn in 2017, and our last go around we had 371 bushel corn. So our hybrids are getting a little bit better, but the 371, when I broke 300 the first time, we had 5 spoon feedings of nitrogen. We had 3 fungicide applications. I was throwing the kitchen sink at this stuff, trying to keep it alive. And this time I just applied nitrogen twice, once with the planter and once at wide drop small, and 1 fungicide pass. So still some yield preservation or tactics there, but a lot less input and thought into corn production once our soils become a lot more healthier.
Interesting. That's very interesting. And and that's kind of the whole premise of our investment fund, is to duplicate those things similarly, maybe not intercropping, but get those input costs down and get operations profitable. I want to talk about one more thing, yet, and then we'll wrap it up. You had if I remember right, you had a couple of corn stalks that you planted in special places that ended up, one I think had 37 ears on it. Talk
31.
a little bit about what was going on there.
Yeah, we just wanted to demonstrate the plasticity of plants. So 2017, our kids were really young. They're 9 and 10 now, but we were potty training them in the summer. So right when the corn came up, we had a big 160 acre field right next to the garden. As soon as it spiked, I just dug up a big, ball around it, put it in the garden, and I just told my oldest that the young one just was born to just pee on it every day we go out there. So he had a target practice, and we just watched this plant evolve. It put 2 suckers on immediately, and then it grew up, and it looked like there was corn growing on all the nodes of the main plant and all the sucker plants. Well, that ended up having silks, and then all of those ears grew big leaves, and I had this plant full of leaves and end up getting 31 ears of corn from that one single seed. And that is the template of intercropping. And a lot of if you take that and infer what we should be doing on the landscape, we should be planting plants and allowing them to do what that corn plant does. And then we can exploit all the technology in the agricultural space. I mean, you get a bag of corn that's $264. It's got 80,000 seeds. There's no law that says you can't take each seed and get the most out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think it that way, I mean, that thought of the 100-100 Club, where James Bates kind of gave me the idea. Junior, I never say his name. Fist in Nebraska.
Yeah.
He demonstrated it. So basically, you plant like 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 population corn. You allow each corn plant to put 3 or 4 or 5 ears on it, and then you put an understory of soybeans, and you can get 100 bushel corn on 5,000 plants and nearly full soybean yields, and start using the shadows to cool the understory plants down. Or stock cropping, where we're using animals to literally put their pee and poop right next to these edge rows of corn. And then next year, planting the corn where the livestock not only took a multi-species cover crop and allowed it to grow multiple times, but deposited their manure and urine there both times. And what's been amazing about Zach's field day, same story as intercropping here at my house. The yields have exponentially went up in relation to more stagnant crop rotations. So whether it's, cover crops or no-till or strip-till, but mostly, I mean, if you can add the livestock component to the soils and get these critters all out in the field and give them venues, whether it's volunteer weed or alleyways and corn, to have livestock in our fields, making 2 or 3 impacts. I mean, we could fix all of our soils in this country in 10 years if we could just get the critters out there and give them something to eat. Yeah. And have some butchers.
Yeah.
I mean, same thought process with the whole saving your seeds and all that stuff. I mean, we have all the answers. It's just, are we going to put in the work and create the systems to empower the people to do this stuff?
It's just the trial and error, and willing to take and being able to take the results that come from that until you figure it out. But it's not only that, because there's old books that talk about this stuff, like from 100 years ago. I know I just had a podcast with Steve Groff, and he was talking about reading some old books, because he's in the hemp thing right now. Mm-hmm. And reading about old books of how they grew hemp and what hemp did for their soil and all this kind of stuff. It's not a cover crop, but it's a cash crop that has some huge benefits that somehow we've gotten away from. So that information,
that was one of our projects. Was we did low population hemp plants during COVID, and we ran chicken tractors and sheep tractors between the hemp plants. And you talk about genetic expression. I mean, we had stalks this big. We had to use a chainsaw to cut them. And it was insane how big those plants would get if you allowed them. And we just looked at it from, we're going to grow hemp for a couple $1,000s, because plants were $2 or $3 a piece. So we just spaced them and put a bunch of mulch around them. So, in the last 10 years, about every plant you can think of, I kind of have this running Guinness Book of World Records thing in my head of like, how big can we make each plant, and let's like put it in a spot to make it happen. Yeah. Kind of weird. I don't know. It's like a Comic-Con fantasy or something, but I really enjoy that whole, like, what happens if you let the dog, be itself, or the kid be itself, or the plant, or it's different thought.
Fascinating stuff, man. This is I love what you're doing. Keep it up. Keep publishing it. One last thing, how can people find you, reach out to you? I think you're doing some consulting work and you're doing a lot of speaking engagement. How can people get a hold of you?
So Jason Mauck 1 on X is probably my most, the easiest way to get a hold of me. You can look me up on Facebook, but there are a lot of things online, a YouTube channel and such. But I'm having a field day June 21st.
Okay.
And we're having John Kemp, Mark Shepard, Zach will be here, Gary Zimmer, Akers is going to work with me on this to see all of these venues that I talked about today, along with automation in the livestock space, things like No Fence, Salin 247, which is an autonomous modulated tractor going in between the alley cropping. And that's what I do when it's real cold out, is I just get on the phone and have an idea and find the people that are doing these things. And that's my goal, just as I get older, is just, instead of really traveling and speaking and being away from my family, bringing all these people here once a year and really making those connections and just making life awesome. I mean, that's, if I go off on a little tangent here, we try to make a business model out of everything, and some things should be a business model, but some things need to just make your life better. And when you go around and you see all these different ways to do things, you just kind of keep proofreading your life into a point to where, okay, what do I want to spend my time doing for the next 20 years? And let's just make our home amazing. So that's going to be with the stock crop or whatever ventures, is how do we make our farm better? How do we make our home better, instead of coming up with some big project or some app or something to just rake in profits in the industrial way.
Yeah. Cool. Very awesome, man. Well, thank you, Jason, for joining us today, folks. If you want to learn more about Jason, go find him on X or Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, and learn all you can about this intercropping and about building your soil health. It'll affect your bottom line. Thanks again, Jason, for joining us, and we'll see you all soon.